Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Moments of Clarity. So, today I have the absolute pleasure of introducing my very good friend, Anish. To give a brief introduction before I let him introduce himself in more depth, um, from my brief LinkedIn stalking and social media stalking, I found Anish has a really interesting background in both chemistry, physics, and then the nuclear and natural sciences, which kind of bled into his transition from a more research-heavy environment, that was focused on STEM based, a very STEM focused thing where applications aren't necessarily kind of explored, and then he took that into the industry where he dove into quantum mechanics, quantum computing as a research scientist, as well as someone who develops product in a really cool company that works with today. But I'll let him talk more about that. So, hello, Niche. Thank you for coming. Do you want to kind of introduce yourself? Because I feel like I've kind of just scraped the tip of the iceberg, but I'm sure that you'd like to talk about the company you work with and just in general how you want to kind of present yourself today.
Yeah, yeah, sounds good. So first, thank you for the amazing introduction for having me today. Really excited to be on this beautiful podcast episode. I think you did a fantastic job of giving the brief highlights of who I am, but all I want to give to the audience is that, um, I'm at a stage in my life where, I've made it past sort of the education portion into a career that I'm actually passionate about. And you know what? I'm very happy to answer both Harlene's questions as well as the audience's questions that they've sent in. So, you know, if you want to connect after this as well, chat more, learn more, feel free to do exactly that. My LinkedIn's open for you.
So for today's episode, Anish chose a drink of choice that I was questioning a lot, which is milk. So we're gonna be taking shots slash sips of milk as we go through. Um, just as a small tangent, I genuinely think milk is the drink of psychopaths. Like it does like every time I think of it, I think of that scene from Get Out where she's sitting in all white and it's like the room with the like computers. Like that's all I associate milk with. So I'm like, oh, I don't know, but it's okay. We'll test my
It's okay.
lactose sensitivity today.
Yeah,
um,
it really feels like it really feels like just a power move of a choice, You
let's
hop on a
go.
call, you're just drinking a glass of milk, like that's someone
That
that has something going on.
like bone density, let's go. Um, so to give a brief idea of what we're gonna be talking about in this episode. So, for context, Anisha and I met through a really interesting charity called STEM Fellowship, and then we kind of scaffolded into becoming friends, where I learned more about his personal interests, including photography and art, which is all really, really interesting. And he is one of why am I saying he? Like you are one of the most well balanced people I've ever met, where you've been able to kind of explore your creative interests while um going into a field that you actually really enjoy. So in today's episode, I kind of wanted to explore not just what that looks like finding your job and stuff like that, but how can we tie in what's your purpose in relation to finding a career path? Like how can you define a good career versus something that you just do as a job? Like is it necessary to have those parameters when you're figuring out what you want to do with your life? And then transitioning that into some more interesting things involving, industry, academia, and then emerging technologies based on the company that you work with right now. So let's get started. Do we want to take our first sip?
Yeah, yeah, for
Okay.
sure, for sure. Cheers.
Not bad. Okay, almond milk is not bad. So the first question I kind of wanted to start the conversation off with was, um, I'd love to know your thoughts about what it means to kind of have found your purpose. Like, is it something that you think is a stagnant thing? I know a lot of times people have that click moment. They're like, yeah, this is exactly what I've always wanted to do. And then they go forward with it and it just remains the same, which is not a bad thing. It just, that's where their drive comes from. Or is it supposed to be is it just supposed to be isolated purpose for that period of your time before you grow and move on to a new chapter? I think that kind of influences your career path a lot. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are around that kind of subject matter.
Yeah, for sure. I think I I think the idea of a supposed to when it comes to, your passions and how you really turn that into motivation for your career. I don't think there is any one right answer, because there are definitely some people that have this one driving passion that they've had since, they were a young a young kid,
They're like,
and it's
"I
just
wanna
sort
be
of
a princess, Imma do it," like, they
exactly.
have a
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
game plan.
yeah,
I'm honestly really envious of those people because I feel like, I my indecisive ass, like, I could never do that, like, just
yeah.
picking one thing and sticking to it. Every time I watch a new TV show, like, I wanna be something different. I'm like, "Ugh." So sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah, like, it's so difficult.
No, 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 and I totally get you, like I've had my fair share of of dreams and goals that have evolved over the years. And that's the other thing, right? Like if you asked me that question what like right when I turned 18 and entered university, right? I probably would have given you a different answer than right now because I was so dead set on one particular thing. And then, as I grew and both as a person and just in age, right? Getting some experience. I learned so many more things. I changed as a human being, I feel, improved myself and focused what I specifically wanted to do. Um, and I think that anyone that's, sort of trying to figure out their own passion should allow themselves the freedom to change effectively, right? To allow themselves the freedom to grow and not be boxed in by any sort of assumption or limits that they place on themselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because I think that when you kind of have that goal or have that vision for yourself, you kind of put on horse blinders where you're so focused on just moving forward in that one direction. You're not open to opportunities that could come up in other places and then ignite passions. Like, I actually had some relatives come over this weekend and like uncles and aunts, they're all sitting and they're talking as they do. It's like, so like, Beta, like, what are you doing right now? And I was like, oh, like, I'm studying mechanical and biomedical engineering. They're like, oh, so you can work in like this company and that company. I was like, I actually don't like research. And then so like the conversation unfolded to the point where they were telling me a story about this guy they knew who studied civil engineering, did one commerce course, and then from just that one course, he found out that he actually really enjoyed it. Ended up becoming like the chief investment officer of a big company in Dubai. And I was like, oh, like like by leaving himself open to understanding that there's other things that I could be interested in, I think he really allowed himself to go on a pathway that he didn't expect. Like I've never heard of a civil to investment jump in a career before, which is so much cooler, which makes the story so much more interesting. Um, but I also kind of wanted to touch on one of the points that you said. So, do you think that it makes more sense to address, like, instead of addressing something as a purpose, like, do you think it makes more sense to address it as a passion or a goal that you have at that stage in life? Because I think that, like you said, like saying that that's your purpose kind of puts you in a box. Or do you think that those two, I want to say, words could exist independently of one another?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm I'm a big fan of not assigning, any one particular path to any one particular person. And, even with myself and my own journey, I felt like I've had, sort of both that kind of like one underlying passion or drive that we talked about, right? But also I recognize that that path or that initial motivation could branch off. And you know, because I realized that the thing that would be best for me, right, is going to change depending on what happens, right? And because I kept myself open to those opportunities, right, these new branching paths, I felt that I was able to become the best version of myself, go down the best possible path because I had the freedom of choice, but I still had that sort of initial guiding motivation or drive to push me forward. Um, and I think when any person, sort of tries to figure out how they want to operate, right? Just try to figure out what works best for you, right? It's not a
Mhm.
binary. You don't have to have this underlying passion since you popped out into this world, right? You can
Came
pick
out of
that
the
up
womb and you're
along the
like,
way.
this is it. This is everything.
Exactly, exactly. But at the same time, for the people that do have that, right? You hang on to that, right?
Yeah, because
And
I'm like,
and
it's interesting to see like how far they. I'm envious of how much ambition they have at such like a young age, like how much drive and
mhm.
focus they have. because like
Yeah.
that in itself is absolutely insane.
And you know what? Like realistically, or I guess pragmatically, if you have something like that from a young age, right? Like you can begin planning earlier and earlier, and that
Hmm.
has so much benefits for, well, for you as an individual, right?
Yeah,
Just because if you're able to plan early, right? You have a widening, sorry, you have a longer runway up until your flight to success, right? Like you have more chances to explore, more chances to fail and to
yeah,
grow, right? Before you really get enter the real world, and you may end up having, at that point, years of experience on the in the path that you have thought about since you were young.
yeah. And I think it's really cool that like um when you're younger, especially me and my friends were talking about this in academia, where a lot of them were considering like studying abroad and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is actually the best time to do it because academia, or at least before you kind of enter the workforce, it's one of the safest spaces to be in because no matter where you feel, you can always just go back to that almost guided path that you have where these are the courses I have to take to graduate. This is what I need to get my degree. So even if you feel, you can fall back on that. Whereas otherwise in life, there is a higher perceived risk of like switching jobs or like moving to a different position in your company. So it's really interesting that like being able to have that guidance and runway ahead of time to be able to pick that path. But at the same time, this is speaking from personal experience where I kind of had a weird interest in both, like, for example, engineering and biology. I was considering med school for a bit. And my a lot of people who were going to med school would say that like, okay, like you have to be dedicated. Like this is your focus. That like once you have to like work to get in, and then when you're in, like that should be your drive forward. Um and that quite honestly, I don't know if it's my commitment issues coming through, but that scares me because the opportunity costs of choosing just one thing is terrifying. And so it kind of segues into something else that I was kind of wondering, but like, how do you know that it's like, does it come from an innate feeling? Is it intuition? Like, how do you pinpoint that something is like more of a passion project versus something that you think is like a viable, focused career? So, like, what makes a good career? Like, how would you know? Where does that come from? Because I think that that's scary. It's something that a lot of people. It's something I'm struggling with right now, where I'm like, I don't know, like, is
Hmm.
consulting really it? Like,
I
also, we should take a sip
I
while
have
you
some.
think. I think that the milk will help.
I was gonna say, like, I always have fun jokes about consulting, but
Please say so.
I'll get into those later on, I suppose. But cheers to that.
Mhm.
What I was gonna say is that I think I think a person needs to evaluate, like what what good means to them when evaluating a career for themselves, right?
Mhm.
Because, good for one person, right? It might look like a really nice salary at an office job, right?
Mhm.
But some people may hate that line of work, right? And that might not be the right fit for them, right? Um, some people may enjoy, like doing site visits, working with their hands, right? Talking to people in person, stuff like that. So, you know, really, really take some time to first understand yourself and your own goals, right? And some of the things you want, the requirements to get there. So as an example, right? If one of your goals is to to have a nice nest egg uh for your kid, right? To have some good money that they can use to launch off into their own world, their own life, you know, maybe a requirement for that is you having that nice salary and you working a job where you can live long enough to give and raise to your child, right? Um, Whereas for other people, right, maybe that's not what they want. Maybe what they want is to achieve their dream of, like having or building their own house in the vast, luscious fields and forests of Austria, like there's so many different goals and types of people, types of end games, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you need, I do think that people need to be pragmatic in a sense, in that, they need to know that, the capitalistic world that we live in is harsh, and and frankly, the more money you make, the better off you are. So, um, I think finding a career that both meets your sort of end goals in your life, right? That can get you there while also being fulfilling to you in an active aspect, right? In a way that can that you both enjoy doing, but also can can support your life goals with that money, those benefits, what have you. Um, you know, the opportunities that are had by a more practical career, right? There's a lot more opportunity than careers that don't. So, you got to find the right balance. You got to find the right balance for you and what can realistically get you to your end goals.
Yeah, I think that that's a really interesting way to look at it, especially because I think people, especially when it comes to like those YouTube videos or like everything, it's like how to become a millionaire. Like, what's that 5 a.m. routine? Like, all of that is
Hmm.
based on formulaic. You kind of want, I think people just, they want a formulaic path to success, but kind of neglect the fact that one person's success isn't the same as just as you said. Where like to become a billionaire you have to do XYZ thing. Like you have to, whereas like in reality when you look at it, a lot of people who are successful have been forced to take an unconventional path. We have like that story of like Bill
Hmm.
Gates making his first computer out of his garage. Like at that time, like if I did that, Mira's like, "The fuck are you doing? Like this is not the education I paid for." So I'm
Hmm.
sure that like though it's easier to go with something that seems more stable or known, it's the ability to self-reflect and be able to understand by experience. So like trying different jobs, even if you end up hating them, that's a good thing. At least you know you hate it. And
Hmm.
eventually until you figure out what you like. But I'd be curious to know, like, what did, if you're comfortable talking about it, what has like your like mental career pathway look like, and how does like has your mentality shifted as you've shifted careers, or as you shifted from like being a youth in school into like I don't want to say old man. Like you're not that much older. I was like, what did
Into
I call you?
adulthood,
I
into
was like,
adulthood.
no.
Yeah.
Into a young
Um,
adult, a young lad.
exactly. Yeah. Uh, so, I think I think over the years, right, like where I've had to think about my career, things have changed just so dramatically, right? And I think it's because I put myself first in a sense, right? I realized that, as opportunities came my way, I could leverage them and, get further on into that idea of meeting my own life end goals. So when I was young, right? Like when I was like a proper kid, right?
A proper kid.
A proper kid,
What's
a
the
proper
age? What's a
child.
proper child? I'm thinking 5. Like, are we going
Was
higher or lower?
I was gonna say like around 8 or so.
Okay, okay, we're
Uh
close. I thought you were gonna
yeah,
say like
yeah.
17. I was like, Jesus Christ.
A proper child of the age of 17. No.
You know that meme where it's
Uh
like, I'm just a 22-year-old teenager, sir. What do you mean? Same
yeah,
energy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, at 22 you're just a 4-year-old adult, so it's
You
always
said
fun.
that to me, and that really helped. I was like crying, shitting, throwing up over something, and you're like, you're just like a child. You're like a 2-year-old like adult. And I was like, you know
You're
what?
like
You're right.
thank you for the motivation, eh?
Thank you for taking away the accountability. It really helps.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, well, I now I just have that imagery in my head. I've forgotten the original question. Oh my goodness.
Oh no, sorry, sorry.
Uh,
Okay, the question was like, how has your
oh
mentality
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
shifted
sorry, how
as
I've
your
changed,
career?
right?
So
So
you were a
so
youth. You were a whole
yes, I
ass
was a
actual
youth.
child.
Exactly, surprisingly.
Whoa,
Yeah. So
black and white
so
television.
yeah, so when I was young, right? Like I I was pretty dead set on the idea of becoming like a scientist, right? And at that age, I didn't even know what that meant. All I knew is that I really, really, really wanted to know how the world works, right? But more so than just being able to like take apart and put back together a radio, right? Something more fundamental. I wanted to know why the stars were in the sky, right? Why the grass was green, why I could, so easily move through air but not through water, right? And things like that. So, I really did use that as sort of like a launching point, right? Where I I really, really got into opportunities in ways that I could learn myself. And at the age of 8, that just meant like reading a ton, right? But then more than that, right? Like as I got older and opportunities came up, I discovered things like, like 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 science, right? That would allow me to, have a systematic understanding of quite literally how the universe works, right? And then once I got to, you know, more of like the late teens, right? That's when I started to understand. I was like, okay, you know, um, being a scientist doesn't match up with what I had in my mind at the age of 8 years old, right? What it
Yeah.
means nowadays, right, is you become not even nowadays, just realistically, you become a professor, right?
Yeah.
You go to you go to undergrad, you go to grad school, you do your postdoc or multiple postdocs, fingers crossed you avoid that.
Yeah, I was
You
like,
you
that one sounds like hell. Like multiple.
Yeah, it's this fun cycle that a lot of people go through called postdoc hell, right? Where because academia is so competitive, right? After getting their PhD, they enter postdoc after postdoc after postdoc for years before they, get an offer from a university for a professorship. Um, and even then, right? There's so many hoops and years you have to go before actually becoming tenured, right? And having some safety in your job. Anyway, so that's the path to become a scientist that I was
Ah,
so
lovely.
dead, dead set on
You know what
at
it
the age of
reminds me
like
of? Like,
mhm,
you know that Greek myth? It's his name is not syphilis, but it looks like the word syphilis.
Sisyphus.
Yeah, that one.
Sisyphus, yeah.
Sisyphus. So he like takes a boulder up the hill and like it falls down. So like you keep doing postdoc after postdoc and like get more qualifications and you never get anywhere. But
Hmm.
I recently read, this is a tangent. I'm sorry. This is like something that I read about the myth where it's like, why would he just not stop? Like I know that's part of the curse, but like why? And so they said that part of him enjoyed the process. He enjoyed rolling it up the hill, and part of it got like excitement out of that.
Mm.
So maybe in a weird way getting those postdocs is kind of helping them just a little inside. I don't think it is
Yeah.
mentally, but maybe there's like validation coming from it, but that's in its own realm, as in its own like thought experiment. But continue,
No,
sorry.
no, it's really fascinating because so with the myth of Sisyphus, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I've always felt that, in a joking sense, I've always felt that the myth of Sisyphus really does well reflect uh, the plight of academia, right? So, in that myth, right? Sisyphus cheats death like twice,
Yeah.
right? And then he's cursed for or to push this boulder up a hill for all eternity, right? And I'm like, oh, that's exactly the path of a grad student, uh, because a person after graduating under their bachelor's, a person doesn't know what they wanted to do, so
So
they
they go
so
into a
they
master's. Yeah. Like
Exactly. They go into a master's, they go into a PhD. They cheat the real world twice, right? And then
yeah.
they're cursed for all eternity to go through postdoc hell uh until eventually maybe they enter academia as a proper professor.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, so but to answer your question, I think anyone can gaslight themselves into enjoying what they do, right? It's no, no, no.
You just need
Jokes
a little
aside.
bit more masochistic after just going through the whole process. You're like, it's okay, maybe I like it. Let's
Exactly, yeah.
let's keep going. But the
No.
point being that that lifestyle is not for you. Pushing proverbial boulders up proverbial hills is not the pathway
Yeah,
forward.
I've while I do appreciate the some of the moral teachings or just the general teachings that you can get from the story of Sisyphus, or even expanding on beyond that
Yeah,
his ideals, his persona, right?
yeah,
Um, I like to have a little bit more fun on the way up, you know?
yeah. I mean, why push a boulder when you can just like ride a car up? Like, there's so many better ways.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. Right. So going back to myself and my journey, right? So after I entered my undergraduate degree, right? Like I even at that point, I was still dead set on things, but I started to learn more about the world and the other opportunities that existed out there. And I even started pursuing some of my other passions at the time, right? My other interests in math in finance and mathematical modeling for that specific purpose, right? For a more, you know, practical in this capitalistic world purpose. Um, and because I started building that repertoire, right? That warmed me up to the idea of what else was out there for people with these problem-solving abilities and the strong desire to learn and use their mathematical wit to solve problems, right? Um, I learned that industry was a thing, and then the, from there the story's just been like, wow, I realized that in this present day, industry can offer me everything that I wanted and more. And I realized that, really I didn't want to be an academic because I was so I hate what the process has become in academia, and especially the prospects for, you know, some of the most intelligent people in the world that pursue their PhDs and other terminal degrees, right? Um, but the plight of academia versus industry is not why I'm here. All I wanted to say is that, it's
It's been
okay
a journey,
for
yeah.
it's been a journey, and it's okay for a person's goals to change.
Yeah. Like, I think that that was actually a lot more sane than I expected that to go to. Like, I was like, I don't know what the fuck his niche wanted to be as a kid, but like that, like I understand that because I think every person in STEM at one point definitely wanted to be a scientist, but I had no clue what that looked like. Like we had those. I don't know if you had them, but like as a child, my parents would buy me board games, but educational ones. So they got me like this science kit with like those fun experiments you could do at home, and I had the time
Hmm.
of my life with those. Those were amazing, and it's kind of unfortunate because I've noticed going into like higher education, it kind of sucks the joy of childish exploration out of what science used to be for us as kids. Like I really
Mm.
enjoyed learning about like, oh, why is lava like not classified as a solid? Like what kind of like learning all about those little things, learning about like you said, why is the sky blue? Why is the grass green? But it makes it so technical, which it kind of comes with the subject matter anyways. But it's unfortunate that it takes like the childish joy of exploration out of it, where labs at this point now are more about getting the assignment in, getting it done, getting a good grade, and then moving forward instead of really like adapting and learning and understanding why certain things work the way that they do. Um, but that I think that comes from, like you said, the bureaucratic nature associated with academia, where there's so many layers and so many levels that you kind of are forced to measure success through numbers and degrees and like qualifications before you actually get that validation from inside that like you've learned and grown in a way that you always wanted to, if that makes sense.
For sure. And imposter syndrome is such a real thing too. That's really debilitating for quite a lot of people. Myself
Mhm.
included. I suffer from imposter syndrome whenever I enter like a big new phase in my life. But,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother conversation.
I like on that topic though, like I think that like
Mhm.
another thing that brings a lot of fear, and this works in both like an academic versus industry sense, and you've seen it both ways. But transitioning from those phases in your life can be really scary, especially when it comes with an external change reflecting what's happening in your own headspace. So like is do you have any like recommendations or like do you have any experiences that you can share where you've had to kind of tackle that more like fearful looking change, whether it's changing companies, a change going from academia to industry, going from like one like undergrad to another. Like what has been your experience with that feeling?
Yeah, I mean, like like every time I wake up, I have to decide, do I want to leave the bed today or do I want to stay? It's
Fundamental choices, really.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. But jokes aside, like that, I think I faced that at really every major change in my life, right? Because I feel that because I'm such a passionate person about what I do, right? I always, like I always think to death about like what the next right or the correct next step is, or if what I did was the right thing for me, right? And this was so true when I had to pick like what undergrad institution to go to, when I had to think about grad school, when I had to think about do I want to dive directly into this or do I want to take a gap year, right? I had to think about this when, you know, I made the transition from academia to industry, right? And even now I make that, I make that decision with more um I guess career specific related things, right? And at every single one of those points in my life, it's always the exact, or at least for me, it's always the exact same story, right? Like there's this big change, that's going to happen in my life. And one that I know will present, amazing opportunities, right? Both known opportunities and at the time, right? Unknown opportunities. So, I know that it will be a net positive, but at the same time, there's this part of me that's like, you know, is this really the right way to go about it, or is this really the right thing to do? Will this give me the right, set of opportunities? Am I making like a huge mistake? Have the past like, however many years of my life been in error? And the answer is always the same, no, right? Like just trust yourself. It's just trust yourself in what you're doing because everything that you've done to get to this point was hard, was difficult, was filled with uncertainty, but you made it through and you're currently in a position where you can enter this new big opportunity. So take it, optimize, and leverage it to the best of your ability in order to propel yourself into even new and even greater opportunities. So again, be selfish, put yourself first, and be proud of what you did to get to where you are, so you can keep on riding that momentum until you find your success.
Yeah, I think that's like a really big and scary thing, especially like I'm from a South Asian background, so the idea
Mm,
of kind of basing like making sure your career aligns with kind of what your parents' expectations are. And I've seen I've been fortunate enough that my parents are supportive and that like they're like, hey, like if you don't like what you're doing, you can always switch. Like it will be there for you. But I've also have seen cases where people are like, I'm going to do like XYZ thing, whether it's grad school, whether it's a certain job, simply because like somebody in their life is influencing that. And it's rather
mhm,
unfortunate to be in that position because in the end of the day, the way I like to see it is that like you might be making those choices for somebody else, but you're gonna be the one alive and forced to deal with the consequences of those when that they have left for whatever reason. And that's a really shitty place to be, to have to deal with other people's expectations and like the consequences of those expectations when they're gone. So exactly, like do things for yourself, push yourself to be the one that's important, especially when it comes to careers. Even in
mhm.
the way that's like, oh, my friend is going to this university, my friend is working in this city, so it's nicer, but in reality, it's like that shouldn't necessarily be a factor because that in the end of the day, like you're the only one that's gotten yourself through every adversity. Like the person in the mirror is the one that's gotten up and pushed forward. So they're the ones that matter. Um,
Mhm,
the other thing I was actually curious about is if you'd like to talk about like what your academic pathway looked like, because
mhm.
because like we've been chatting for like years now. Um, I learned about like how you worked in like you studied in BC, you came to Ontario, and I was like, oh my god, and you know Toronto things, like you know Toronto slang, it's nice. Um, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about differences you've seen like in both, you know, studying across Canada as well as like how you think that that's influenced what you've studied and like how you've perceived it. Like, are there educational differences do you think between the provinces and like are there limitations or positives that you've gotten out of it because you've been able to travel while studying or like while working?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first, running you through the journey, right? Um, so when I was in secondary school, high school, right, grade 8 to 12. At that point, right, like I especially early on, I didn't know the path to becoming an academic, right? Just reaching that sort of um that end goal of professorship scientist, right, at that age. Um, so I had to learn, right? And I discovered that in order to, become an academic, at least the traditional path that people would take is, you you find a place to do your bachelor's, right? You then go on to do your PhD or potentially master's and PhD at some other institutions. Then once after you've defended and you've gone through with that, you enter your postdoctorates, right? And those are effectively contracts that you take with various labs, uh, excuse me,
No.
at various labs at whatever uh, particular area, research area that you want to go in, right? You you have the opportunity to publish papers, right? Until until eventually you're accepted into uh, university as like on a professorship track, and then from there you go through you go through being an adjunct, associate, and full professor, right? After a lot like years effectively of bureaucracy is probably the right word to use, but I always feel like it has a negative connotation. But anyways, you go through years of that, right? Until finally, you have some job security as a tenured professor, right? You have your lab set up, and you have your grad students doing your research, actively while you supervise. And that's sort of the path that a person takes until emeritus and they retire in academia. Now, going back to your question about how things differ between the provinces that I've studied in, BC versus Ontario. I th I think fundamentally, it's been pretty similar, right? When you compare physics programs across different universities, right? In terms of the core content, it's going to be largely the same, right? In terms of like research topics, that's where there'll be a lot more variance, right? Because the university that you're at will have its own history of how it's developed its research programs, right? On who its experts, who the professors there are, right? That can, dive into these various areas. I think the biggest difference I noticed is probably more specific to like universities than it is to regions, right?
Mhm.
And at least at the undergraduate level, which is where I think a lot of the viewership of this podcast will be, um, you know, where you study in terms of like, like how different it's going to be from region to region. I think that makes so little difference because, chances are the people around you, especially as an undergrad, right, are pretty much in the exact same shoes as you, right? They've come to university, right, to try to figure out, what they want to do or learn. Um, the skills that they need to be on that path. And they're all they're by and large, they're all about the same age, this awkward sort of, late teens, early 20s trying to figure that out. So, you know, there's a lot more similarities and differences, right? From place to place that you go. I do think that there is a difference in terms of the educational culture, across different countries, right? Or even larger regions, like between the differences between academia in North America versus Europe, right?
Mhm.
Um, but East Coast, West Coast Canada, much less of a difference, other than some differences in slang, like for like for
You know
example, right?
Hoko Man. I was like, oh, okay, like it's all good. Like you're like, I understand.
Exactly. Oh, that's another thing. I guess
Yeah.
I guess I guess the social scene is probably the most different thing, right? Like
Mhm.
like 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 Hoko and partying, I think is a whole different beast in Ontario than it is here in
Really?
BC. Absolutely,
But like,
absolutely.
don't worry about it. I know.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
so
funny.
many so many memories.
No, I understand. I feel like they really, or at least the perception that Ontarians have of BC is that it's very like culturally rich. There's a lot of like there's a really big art scene. There's like a lot of
Hmm.
like film production that happens there. Whereas Ontario's very Toronto Drake. Like you know what I mean? It's very pop culture
Yeah.
esque. So I think that there's like where BC kind of thrives in a more like rich, blooming almost
Hmm.
culture. Here it's more like rapid shifting based on what's happening in like the music and entertainment industries, which I think is really cool too.
For
Um
sure. And you know what? It's so funny that like how you led into that, right? Because I think at least over here in BC, right, a lot of people would argue that Toronto has a richer culture
Oh my
than
god!
that. Yeah, exactly. See, that's what I say every day, right? But you
I
know,
feel like I've been
uh,
there. There's no culture. What are you talking about?
no, yeah. So, but that's the thing, right? Because Toronto has, and I guess the East Coast in general, right, has had a longer time to develop, right?
Mhm.
The communities that have been built around arts and culture are like one, much larger over
Yeah.
there, two, better funded over there, and three, it's a lot more accessible and ingrained in in those cities, in those populaces, right? Compared to somewhere like Vancouver, in here in BC, where it's a much younger city,
Yeah.
right? Um, it's still finding its identity, right? But at the same time, it is pushing out amazing, I think, amazing artists, right?
Yeah, like,
And
it's
it's so important to support. It's hashtag support local, right? Yeah,
that's
there you go.
Yeah, no, we love it. No, I think it's fantastic, especially because, like, at least I think it's also just because I perceive BC through you, and you just tend
Mm,
to be more in touch with the creative side of things, which is why I have that perception, which is really interesting because I think that a lot of people perceive places based on the people that they know there and how they
mhm.
interact with their surroundings. Where a lot of times in your stories, you're like, oh, like, I went traveling here, I'm beside the water there. So I'm like, I'm just literally picturing beach, mountains, and then, like,
Mm.
art scene, and that's my perception of all of BC.
You know what? It's a good perception to have, so
And
I'm
you're like,
I'm
"It's
I'm
okay, I'll
happy
take it."
about that.
You're like, "I've done a good job." Um, but steering back on course, so we've talked about your brief time in,
Mm,
academia. I did have one last question about traveling since we're on the topic before we move to
mhm.
emerging technologies. But why did you I think it was just for a research, assistant job. Why did you decide to shift to Ontario for that job, if you
Oh
don't mind?
yeah. So
Yeah.
so in undergrad, right? Like my studies were specifically in or sorry, my research was specifically in theoretical and computational nuclear physics, right?
Mhm,
And in Canada, like really there's only like a couple uh of like nuclear physics research programs in Canada, right?
mhm.
And I knew that I wanted to be in Canada to be, a little bit closer to my family, right?
Yeah.
At least in terms of like how easy it is to get back in case something happens, right? So the only place in Canada that I could really go to grow and pursue this was in Ontario, between Waterloo and the University of Guelph with
Yeah.
their joint physics program. Um, so I went there, and that's where I sort of got a taste of I guess going further along like the academic research path, right? And while I was there, I came across an opportunity to transition into industry. And at that time in my mind, I was like, okay, well, I should at least get a taste of what the other side is like before I, like hard commit to academia. And
Mhm.
you know what? I think that was probably the best idea that I've ever had because, it showed me what I was missing in a sense,
Mhm.
or rather, it showed me how different and what's the word? What industry could offer me,
Yeah.
right? In terms of opportunities and impact, I think, right? Personal growth was far more than what was there in academia. And there's a bunch of reasons for this that we can talk about,
Mhm.
but because I decided to take that risk, right? And try something new out for a little while, it really helped me decide like, okay, this is what I actually want to do, and this is how I can get there. And then from that point, I guess, I just sort of made the transition. And I had some like life events that happened during that time too that really, you know, had to make me decide at some point, what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I ever since, right, haven't looked back, and it's been the best decision of my life.
No, that's fantastic, and it's always nice to look back and be like, "Thank fuck I made that choice," because otherwise, like, I'd be living a very different life. And that
Hmm.
transitions perfectly into what we're talking about now. Good job. I'd love to talk about, like, I know you I've been lucky enough that you've shared, like, more about the company you're currently working with good chemistry and, like, the really cool work and the potential that
Hmm.
the product currently has. So do you wanna do a brief introduction of the company and, like, kind of your role in it? And to that, we can take another drink, and then we can talk more about the intricacies of, like, your background fueling emerging technologies in general.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
that
yeah.
sounds fantastic. So, cheers to that. Cheers to emerging tech. Nothing like a good old glass of milk in the morning. It's good.
I literally don't have breakfast, and then on top of that, it's milk of all things. Like, this is it's such a strange, like, my body's like confused. Like, what's going on?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
fair enough.
so introduction to good chemistry.
Okay. Yeah, so the company that I currently work for, it's called Good Chemistry,
Mhm.
the Good Chemistry Company. And effectively what we do is we make use of the most cutting edge technologies that we have right now, specifically, AI/ML, like artificial intelligence slash machine learning, all those fun buzzwords presently. Um, Combine that with the potential for quantum computing, like allowing that emerging tech to sort of, once it's ready, augment the capabilities that we currently have. And finally, combining that uh, that sort of pipeline with current modern cloud computing, which has enabled the calculation of problems that just were not feasible, even just a couple of years ago. And how do we do this? With our products that we've developed. One is called Chemist Cloud, Qemist Cloud, and the second is called Tangelo. Chemist Cloud is almost our mainstay of product, at least in terms of molecular simulation, right? We use this platform that we've developed that to combine these technologies in order to go beyond what has been possible in the past years, and we in the field of chemical simulation. And this has applications in a ton of areas that range from things like pharmaceuticals, right? The development and discovery of new drugs, to other things that are very different than that in the clean energy sector, right? Into looking at how to develop more efficient energy storage solutions, right? Better batteries, for example. Um, and again, all of this is possible because we recognize that it's a hard problem. We take the best experts in all of these different sub areas and come and put them all together to solve this very specific problem that has a ton of excuse me, a ton of potential to make the world a cleaner and healthier place. So that's what good chemistry does. What I do is I work there as a product associate. And what this means is that I help out with anything and everything related to the product and making the product the best it can be. So I've done a lot of work on the product marketing side. I've done a lot of work on the product management side, and so on, right? And what this entails is that I need to make sure that I know exactly what our clients, our potential customers even, what they want, what they need, and then how to take those problems that need solutions and then take what we have, augment that in order to meet the needs and wants of our clients and customers. Um, so that's what someone in a product role does. Now, oh yeah, that's right. So I also forgot to mention, right, like like how I went straight from, like the academic nuclear physics setting to quantum computing and all this.
Yeah.
So that opportunity that I mentioned earlier, right, and that would transition out of um like I guess academic research, right, into this was was a role for company called One Qubit. And One
Mhm.
Qubit, they have a very similar idea, right? They take quantum computing and AI and they use that to solve some of the most difficult problems that, the world has, things that are unsolvable with in a traditional sense.
Mhm.
Um, and over there, I worked on the applications of AI and quantum computing to finance problems, right? Which because of once again those side passions that I developed earlier in my undergrad, right? One of those, as I mentioned, was finance and mathematical modeling. So I was able to take, this past opportunity that I sort of, built the skills for,
Yeah.
right? uh, and then combine that with my formal physics education and research training uh, to be the perfect candidate for this role, right? And because again, I was open to opportunities from our earlier conversations, everything worked out and ended up on this amazing path. So, so at one qubit, I worked as a research scientist for a few years, and then I realized like, wow, this has been amazing. And but I want to work in a role where I can also have um, where I can also directly work with people in a sense too,
Yeah.
because I have I have pretty good people skills, I like to think.
I like if I do
So
say so myself.
yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I wanted to combine both this technical aspect, but also with those soft skills, right? This product sense that I wanted to develop, and that's how I ended up here at Good Chemistry, um, working a product role, moving from academia to startup to another startup. Uh, so it's been a fun journey, and that's that.
No, it's really cool to like hear about it because from a third party, like you can just really see that like you're not only passionate about like like the science behind it, like the chemistry of figuring out why and solving tough problems, but like the problem solving has been a consistent theme throughout everything that you've kind of discussed between jobs. And it's cool to see that because I've read somewhere where if you take like the baseline of stuff that you're interested in, so let's say someone's like, I just genuinely really enjoy playing video games. So breaking that down, it's really just you enjoy quick thinking, problem solving, spontaneous decision making. Um
Mhm.
so to find something that you're passionate about would just be transitioning those skills into another job, passion, hobby that applies them in a way that, like you said, might be lucrative in a capitalist, market. So it's
Mm.
really cool to see that like you've really knowingly or unknowingly really honed in on that problem solving regardless of what startup or company you worked with. But to the more interesting questions, I think you did briefly talk about like how there's really cool applications to what good chemistry the both products that good chemistry is currently making on both like the clean energy sector as well as the pharma kind of drug development side of things. So I'd love to know your like what do you think you are the most excited about in terms of like the promising real world applications? Like, what are you excited to see come from this, especially based on your background fusing kind of the data science side of things and quantum computing and chemistry and how it kind of shifts our strategy in tackling these global issues, whether it be the ones you mentioned or other ones like health disparities or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think what I'm most excited about is just being not only, these really cool technologies being used, but the fact that they actually have the potential to make a big difference in the coming years, right? So one of the reasons why computational chemistry is so important is because it takes one, a lot of time, and two, a lot of money to develop, with the case of healthcare, pharmaceuticals, excuse me, to develop new drugs that can cure, these very terrible ailments and diseases, right? Um, and doing that traditionally means a lot of guesswork, a lot of wet work, a lot of failed, a lot of failed candidates, right?
Mhm.
And if you're working in person, right, like wet lab stuff, then you need to develop, so many candidates, go through so many different types of expensive, long trials before you're able to actually reach market,
Mhm.
and make a difference. And that process can take, literally decades, right? You look at some of the most famous drugs that have been out there. Um, and those have taken, again, decades to reach the market, which
Yeah.
is, I think, a travesty in a sense, you know? Um, so how do we get around that? Well, that's where computational chemistry comes in. Because if we want to expedite things, right? What better way to do it than to simulate it, right?
Yeah.
But then comes the hard part. Well, how do we simulate it? Turns out it's a very, very difficult problem to do for systems of scales that matter effectively, right?
Mhm.
And also the fact that quantum chemistry, right? So how molecules behave, right? Um, sorry, how molecules behave and so on,
Mhm.
it's governed by the laws of physics, right?
Yeah.
And those don't scale very well the larger your molecules get,
Yeah.
at least in terms of computation. So it's a very tough problem, and computers for a long time, even now, are very limited in what they can solve. But because of the advent of this type of computing, right, these new technologies, we're able to actually make those computations a reality.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So that's what I wanted to say
You
about
get
that,
excited
right?
about, yeah.
I'm excited about the fact that, these previously impossible problems to solve, right? They're becoming more of a reality
Yeah.
because of the type of work that we're doing here at Good Chemistry. And that means so much opportunity and room to grow effectively. Um, the room to make the world a better and healthier place that I'm excited about.
No, that's amazing, especially because right now in one of my classes, we're talking about the difficulties in high throughput screening processes for research facilities when it comes to antibiotic resistance development. So to give a bit of background, it's like we recently found out that the reason why there's a number of reasons why it's hard to kind of get drug development out there, especially in relation to antibiotics, but in pharma in general. But one of the interesting ones I found was that because they're very low hanging fruit for like chemical changes, whether it be like just a quick molecule change to make it a different compound so that antibiotics are less resistant to it. Those have already kind of been said and done. And so now it's becoming more and more difficult to find different deviations that are still working. So um this literally tackles one of the problems that we're trying to solve in class right now, where how do you effectively simulate and allow for facilities to have access to technology that gets rid of redundancies when it comes to wet lab work. So we're focused more on solutions that are more feasible and more likely to be successful when it comes to testing and getting it from the development to the sorry from the discovery to the development phase of and then eventually to market. So that's really cool that that's already been happening in the background we're literally talking about it in class right now. um but one of the other things that I was curious about, especially in relation to a field that's so ever evolving, like you said, there's like problems that we didn't think we could solve before are suddenly becoming more tangible. The solutions are almost at our fingertips. That's so interesting to see. But there's a lot of continual technological advancements constantly happening and coming forward. So how do you kind of, especially now that you're looking at it in a marketing lens, welcome to the family, view the competitive landscape evolving in the context of your startup or like in other jobs that you worked with? And how do you kind of work to keep ahead of the curve in such a dynamic and such a difficult landscape in relation to like IP concerns and stuff like that? Like it's difficult to foresee what another company's going to do, but at the same time, you have to stay ahead. So how do you kind of tackle how it's so dynamic?
Yeah, for sure. And you know what? Like I I think that's one of the more fun parts of my job, like doing the market research, right?
Mhm.
Like the product marketing to understand how the landscape is evolving, right?
Yeah.
Both at a technical front and in a more general business front, right?
Mhm.
So I think the technical part is is the easy part to figure out because you just read through papers, you see the breakthroughs that other companies or academics make, and you're like,
Mhm.
okay, that's how far the needle has moved on the fundamentals, engineering and physics side of things, right?
Yeah.
Um, But then looking at how money flows from investor hands or government hands to industry, right, to research, that's a whole nother story, right? Because the goals of your investors, right, are going to change over the years, right?
Mhm.
And you need to position yourself and your product in the best way possible in order to in order to
Get
be
investors.
successful in getting investment money.
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, and in order to do that, right, you almost need to keep track of perception of your like your niche, right?
Yeah.
Because at least with quantum computing, right, there's been a lot of hype that's been built up around it, right? And I think that most of the people that, both uh, push this hype as well as the ones that believe it, both they both overestimate the immediate or near-term impact, right? They're like, oh, this technology will solve all of our problems, right? But it's still not a guarantee if this technology it's gonna make it that far. You know, just one period, right?
Yeah.
But also make it that far within like a reasonable amount of time,
Yeah.
right? People are talking about these technologies like they're going to solve all of our problems by next year, right? Which is not realistic.
Yeah, I feel
So,
like I don't know.
so understanding the perception people have of your technology, right? And trying to marry that with the reality of what it can offer in the near term, right? I think that's been the trickiest part about it. But you do that by understanding people, by talking to people, and combining that with sort of the other market research that you do in the background, reading market reports, going through papers, and so on.
Yeah, no, I think it's really cool, especially because like my parents come from a financial background, so like and then learning from a background in STEM how investors kind of perceive like the difficulties in gaining investment, especially for startups in this space, is so hard because there's such a there's such a high risk when it comes to return on investment. Like either the technology will go be very successful, or um it'll be shit. And so investors looking for a more stable kind of way to approach that, it's so scary for them. And especially in the way that it impacts like the market as a whole. Looking at it in the way that people talk about certain companies like Tesla and like, oh my god, like Elon Musk said or did this, and like how that not only shifts the stock for Tesla but other adjacent technology companies. Um, so it's and like how the buzzwords revolving around what big companies say affect the perception of other companies as well. So right now, like investors are going crazy over words when companies use words like machine learning or AI, like GTP. I will never say that word right. Chat GTP. Like a lot of companies now and a lot of investors now are like kind of pushing forward in that space harder when it comes to where they're sending money, just because it looks like it has more short term prospects, whereas like bigger solutions, more kind of well thought out long term solutions, don't you can't necessarily see the impact right away and see the return on investment right away. So it's really interesting that you said how the people come into play when it comes to really understanding the future of the industry. So that's fantastic. Um, but now that we're at like the hour-ish mark, how do you feel about transitioning from like the big deep questions to like the quick short questions?
Yeah, for sure,
Okay.
for sure. If you want to get me off of your show that badly, we can move on.
You're like you're look you just you're like you can kick me off now. We don't have to do this. So you're like it's okay. So how this works for
Mhm.
anyone who's has not been indoctrinated, uh, me and you will ask a shared of 10 questions of 5 each. They can be quite literally anything. I know I sent you a list, but they can be off the list. It can be absolutely, it doesn't have to be related to the topic. Silly, goofy, and anytime you don't want to answer, you take a shot of milk. So do you want to get started with the first one, or should I?
Feel free to take it away.
Okay. I'd be curious to know. I know because I've got to know you. I know you're a movie guy. So what is like your absolute favorite movie of all time?
So we're starting off with with a question that has an answer that's even longer than, the past hour of content. Yeah, so the short answer to that is it's so impossibly hard to pick one because there's so many different things about mo film, movies, right? Cinema, whatever you want to call
Yeah,
it, that I enjoy, right? So, there are candidates that are like the best in this genre.
yeah.
Even that's hard, right? Like there are movies that stand out for, technical filmmaking aspects,
Mhm.
right? But I think if I had to answer your question, one of the films that got me into this, right, at all was 2001: A Space Odyssey. And one of the reasons, yeah, yeah, I know, right? One of the reasons that I really, really, really loved that movie was just because, one, I was like a science nerd, right? So like even as a kid when I watched it, I was like, wow, this is so cool, right? But also it was a movie that really takes the audience and, takes them through a journey to make them feel things, right?
Yeah.
It's, you know, and I think that's the purpose of like a lot of sci-fi, right? Is to make you feel. But it's done in a way where the director literally it puts you into a world of their design, right?
Yeah.
And if they're a really phenomenal director, right, they're able to genuinely make you feel things, put you in a world that you otherwise wouldn't have been in to grow your empathy in a sense.
Mhm.
And I think because the first like real movie that got me into this, right, was into movies was 2001: A Space Odyssey. I was able to realize this and really start my journey into appreciating and understanding film and TV and so on. And not to say that like I'm the biggest like expert by any means, but I
Just
I
gassing
did
yourself up.
exactly, but I genuinely have found a love for anything that it involves the film, really.
No, I get that. Like, I don't know. I don't think there was one movie that really started it for me. It just kind of like you just fall into it, and it's just so interesting. The more you learn about a film, especially after watching it and then watching it again with that background of what the director wanted, what the audience was supposed to see, all of that stuff, it makes it so much more interesting. But that's okay. I have to add that to my list. I haven't actually ever seen the Space Odyssey, so thank you for the recommendation. Okay, your turn.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, 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 okay. So I don't think you and I have ever talked about our childhoods that much, you know?
Okay.
So one of the things I want to know, right, is what has what was the most impactful year for you as a youth? And when I say youth, I mean from like 0 to 10. What year was it and what memory makes it stand out to you?
That's that's so tough because I feel like there's bubbles of memory, so I'm like, how do I choose one?
What was the
Um,
first thing that popped into your mind then?
okay, I feel like it has to be okay. So for going back to my background of being South Asian, I've been lucky enough to grow up in a community. And so like we were really close to the neighbors. This is a really silly, goofy memory. Um, and so like my parents would encourage me to play with the kids, like the neighboring kids outside. Um, and we ended up becoming friends. And I vividly remember. I think like I don't know if it was near 2012, like when the whole like oh my god the world might end thing. But me
Mm,
and the neighbor, like I vividly remember like being like it wasn't even our phone. I think it was one of our parents' phone, searching up like Planet X and like how it might crash into Earth and being like me,
mm.
like probably 9 at absolute most, being like, how do I like prepare for death? Like how do I like what do I do? How do I spend my last few years on Earth? Like that was so funny because it's like you're a literal child, but I was like, okay, we saw that, we internalized the idea that we're gonna die, and they're like, okay, let's play cricket now. So that's definitely it definitely was a memory. I think it definitely was something. But in general, I think like community, like any aspect when it comes to like community bonding has been really big for me. My cousins have a lot of big memories between Just Dance, but I think that was just the strangest one. Like just a 9-year-old child being like contemplating an entire planet crashing into its own. Absolutely insane.
Yeah, like I think facing your mortality is a very uh, life-defining experience.
It's
Uh,
formative for sure.
yeah, yeah. That's the most like Gen Z doomer answer I've ever heard. So I'm happy about that. Um,
I swear there are other examples. I do not know why my brain blanked on that and was like, end of the world. But I have a similar question in relation to family for you. So like,
mhm.
I can cook, but I love to. I feel like food tells me a lot about people. So what is your favorite like at home, like home cooked, you're with the family kind of meal? Like whether it's something your parents make, whether like what's like a food
Yeah,
that you're like home food?
that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Because like the home food that I make for myself that I enjoy the most is just a nice for our non-South Asian viewers, a nice chickpea curry with some rice, you
God,
know?
that
Just
hurt. That hurts so
yeah,
much,
yeah.
but yeah, I know
Like
exactly what you mean.
we got to translate, you know, we got to translate.
What translate?
But yeah, no, but I'm a huge fan of that because it's a simple dish that, you know, I like over the years I feel like I found the perfect ratio of ingredients, you know. Um, but when it comes to like comfort food, oh man, this is a hard question.
Yeah,
Okay, so
because it's like
comfort food.
yeah,
Yeah, comfort food when I think of like my family, it's like it's the dal like the lentil stew that my father makes, right? Because it's such a simple dish, and it's something that I've had so much growing up that it just feels and tastes like home,
yeah.
right? Um, yeah, so those are my two answers,
Wait,
or
which color
my
was the
two.
dal? I'm so curious.
Oh, it was yellow dal, like split peas, yeah, yeah,
My mom
or
makes the same
split
one. I know
lentils.
exactly. It hits so good. I love that for you. And then
Yeah,
very
yeah.
very good answers.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my question for you now. Okay. Okay.
You're like
So, 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 so on the, okay, on the topic of tangent of food, right?
yeah.
What what was the worst restaurant experience that you've had, and what made it the worst?
Hmm.
So,
That's a really tough question because I'm like one my vitamin deficient. I was trying to remember things is like tough on its own. I'm trying. Give me a mo. Um.
so while you think, right?
Yeah.
I'll give some context. I
Yeah.
think the worst restaurant experience that I've had, right, was not because of the food or the server, but rather because of how awful the date I was on was. So, you know, it doesn't have to be specifically about the restaurant
Oh,
itself.
okay.
It
I
could
was
just
like,
be
okay,
an experience
interesting.
around a restaurant.
Okay, so I think one of the worst experiences, um, both best and worst. So me and my cousins, so we had a get together, and like as you know, like I feel like when brown people get together, it's just like around food, which makes sense. But also, I think like we need to be more active as a society. Like, let's not just always eat when we're together. So we went to this restaurant, um, and we made the mistake. So there's six of us of our cousins. So we had two tables, six of the cousins, and then all of our parents. And it was a buffet style like restaurant situation.
Mhm.
And we were like, so we were like, okay, guys, we can catch up later. This is an expensive restaurant. We need to physically eat as much food as possible. Um, so we decided not to speak like the entire time. Like we were just gnawing, looking at each other across the table, this big ass table. I never thought I ate more in my life to the point where all of us walked outside like Indian dads with their like stomachs out, and then my cousin vomited on my shoes, and I was like, I sir, this was not how far I needed to go. But it was like just the raw, just we have to take advantage of this moment to the highest degree. It was not worth it. Getting puke out off of clothing is not worth expensive dinner. I do not encourage. Overeating is not recommended. But yeah,
I think that
that's gotta be it. I have to know more about the state. We need to this for later. I'm
for
curious.
sure, for sure,
Uh,
for sure.
okay, okay.
Mhm.
We're both Leos. I'm so curious. Would you want to be famous? Like, would you want fame? I'd love to know because
So
you seem like a man who would enjoy it, but I also don't. At the same time, I think you would hate it. So I don't know.
I think there's pros and cons pros
You
and
have to
cons to
choose.
fame. Yeah, yeah. Uh, I think I wouldn't. I think I. Fuck, that's a really good question.
It's so hard being so smart.
I, I think I would. I think I would enjoy it for sure because just being famous has perks, right? Assuming it's like good fame,
Yeah.
um, you know, like people want to meet you. It just gives you so many opportunities.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I've seen like the lack of privacy that, like actually famous people have, right? Like
Yeah.
celebrities that the public is obsessed over. And I think that would make me give up too much freedom to be happy in the long run, in a
Yeah.
sense, right? Um, so I think if we're talking like 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 pop idol megastar fame, maybe not. If we're
You want me
talking
to
about
watch
like the
this? Yeah.
yeah, I think that's too much, man. I think
Yeah.
that's way too much fame for me to handle. So I'll go with like a nice moderate level of fame. Um, but yeah, so if the answer is like superstar idol thing, right? Answer is no. If it's something a little bit more moderate,
I
then yeah.
I'd like to propose a solution to you. Like, get to the megastar level of fame, do whatever the fuck you
Mhm.
want with that, and then fake your death, and then just hop off like the face of the earth for a bit and then just resurface as a normal guy so you can like live casually. I think that's a great idea. Identity
Yeah,
fraud, maybe, but like
it's on the bucket list now, I guess, like
faking your death is on the bucket list.
exactly.
Okay.
It's either succeed or I actually die, like either or.
There's no choice. Like success is the only option. I like that.
Hmm.
Okay, two more questions left for each of us.
Okay, solid. Okay. So maybe one that's more related to our backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
Um, what's a technology that you feel or the most excited about right now? And it could be like a medical technology. It can be like one of these like out there technologies, you name it.
Okay, this is gonna be very nerdy. I read this on so Harvard has a website, forget the name, but it kind of shares some of the research that's coming out right now. And I read this in my first year of university, and it got me so excited about medicine in general. But the idea of hydrogels as a whole are interesting. But the application that I was at the time, for context, I was working on a project where we had to design a hip implant for one of our patients. And it was really cool because we got to see the x-rays, we got to see like his entire chart. I knew his medical background, like everything he was taking. I knew he was active, older man. Um, fucked up his hip though. So
Mm.
the cool thing is that when I read about that, I like and the article associated with it about using it in surgery, and I was like, okay, like our client or our patient actually, he's suffering from antibiotic resistance. So it'd be really cool if like the prospect of hydrogels being used in isolated parts of the body to allow for pain relief medications and um just post-operative medication to be administered to patients without having them suffer from like ailments because they are now antibiotic resistance now because other medicines don't work on them because they took too much. It's a really cool concept because how we wanted it to go down was have the hip implant in place and then have hydrogel surrounding it that naturally diffuse and release the medicine in his hip area. And I was like, that's just the concept that we can be doing this kind of stuff currently is absolutely astonishing, and I think it's really cool. The more I learn about disparities that we're currently facing in the healthcare system, the more excited I get that like technology exists. It's just the fact that we have to implement it. So I'm like excited to see that implementation happen because it's we're so close. It's a matter of having a cohesive plan to make sure it happens. So that's what I'm really excited about. Oh my gosh, that was a great
That,
question.
that's
Okay.
that's so cool. That's so fantastic. And I totally agree with you. Just seeing the potential being unlocked is so cool.
Yeah, like it's fantastic to see that kind of push forward, especially when you've been studying it. Like that's why I think that you're so excited about the company that you work with.
Hmm.
Um, okay. I think Is this my last question? Is this my last question? I think so.
Okay.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay. I'll leave it at like this one. I think it's a really interesting one. This is kind of how we'll wrap it up for today.
Mm.
But what's one piece of advice or one kind of compliment or just something said to you that's really stuck to you that you think people should know? That you think
Uh,
you want to share with others that you're like, yes, like this changed how I felt at that time.
okay. Advice and compliment.
It can be either or.
So I have an answer for each of them. So
Use
how,
it, yeah.
but I also have an answer for something a little bit in between. So I'm gonna go
Okay.
with that one.
Okay.
Um, the best compliment that I've received that sort of validated, um, I guess advice or stuff that I've done, right, is is you are a good human being, right? And the and the
Sorry, I
reason
was like the bar is so low.
I know, right? Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that goes to show, like how deep imposter syndrome is for me too, right?
Yeah.
And I say is because I still feel that way some days.
Mm.
Um, but when I heard that, right? One, it was a good compliment because it was like, you know what? You you're a good person and you are a human being, right? So you're
Yeah.
allowed to be who you are. You're allowed to grow. You're allowed to make mistakes, right? Um, and the reason I think that like resonated so deeply with me is that I think the advice that sort of complements that compliment is the fact that or not the fact is you should always be putting yourself first in the sense that you want to be putting yourself in a spot where you can have the most opportunities because there is no right or wrong answer for just about everything in life, right? There's just there's just where you are now, where you have been, and where you will be. So focus on what you can control, accept where you are, and try to put yourself in places that will allow you to do more, have more doors and opportunities.
That was deeply profound. Like, props to you. Whoever said that to you, I hope they are living very comfortably. I hope they have a very inconvenient day. But that
Oh, wow.
if it was a very convenient day, that was what you're like,
Yeah, I
you're
was like,
like
okay, yeah, yeah, just damn this person, damn this, you know?
a very convenient day. I hope they find everything they need in their fridge. Um, but yeah, I think that's a great way to end things off. Because it really wraps up like the cusp of any journey you go through in life, academia or otherwise, where you should be focused on making sure that one, you're not a shitty person, and two, that like you're growing through that. Even if you make mistakes, you're always striving to move forward and look
Hmm.
back and learn from that. But I think that is a very profound way to end our podcast today. So thank you so much, Anish, for coming. And I'm sure that if anyone has any questions, I'll link your bio and stuff like that below so that they can ask and message you on LinkedIn. And thank you to everyone for listening to this podcast. And I hope to join you for another episode of Moments of Clarity.
Thank you so much for having me, you know?
No worries.
And thank you to the audience. Sorry for that pause.
Yeah, I
I
was
was
just like,
unsure how
my
this was
brain was
closing.
lagging. I was absorbing.
Yeah, but you know, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Harleen. Thank you so much to Harleen's audience, and take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Goodbye.